Hello, and welcome to the Demoette series for TIBCO Data Virtualization, or TDV. In this Demoette, we demonstrate the use of SOAP data sources. Here is our agenda. We begin by defining SOAP data sources and outlining their importance for our customers. Next, we walk through a very basic demo of building and using a SOAP data source. Finally, we summarize the contents of this Demoette. Let's begin by discussing what SOAP data sources are and why they are important for our customers. TDV's SOAP data source capability enables TDVs to introspect any SOAP-based web service. Data responses from these web services can then be used within TDV like any other data. For example, data may be transformed, federated with other data sources, and published for end-user consumption. SOAP data sources are important to our customers for two reasons. First, they provide a quick and easy way for TDV to access data that is accessible via URL on the Internet or on corporate intranets. Second, SOAP-based access is a commonly used API for many third-party enterprise applications. In both of these cases, SOAP data sources enable TDVs to access data that may not be available as relational table structures. TDVs can then transform this data and join it with data from other sources. For example, SOAP-based data may be transformed into relational structures and then used to augment data in a corporate data warehouse. Next, let's walk through a very basic demo that shows the use of a SOAP data source. Here is the business problem that we illustrate in this demo. We have a corporate data warehouse that is visible to TDV. It contains information on customers and their purchases. Our data analysts would like to know how weather affects customer buying patterns. Unfortunately, weather information is not available on the data warehouse. However, IT has identified an external website that contains daily temperature data for cities. If we could augment the data warehouse by federating this temperature information, we could enable the data analysts to investigate how weather affects customer purchases. Some setup is required before you begin this demo. First, we need to ensure that TDV is configured in a way that will allow us to deal with large XML responses from a web service. Open the TDV configuration window, which is found under Administration on the Studio main menu. Navigate to Studio, Data, and note the setting for XML text size. By default, this is set to only 1,000 characters, which is often insufficient. Set the number to 1,000,000, as shown here. Next, we need to make sure we have a web service that the data source can consume. Use the additional resources that accompany this Demoette to install and publish the artifacts you will need to simulate a Temperatures by City web service. This will provide the data that our SOAP data source will consume. In addition, use the additional resources that accompany this Demoette to install views of customers and orders that will serve as our corporate data warehouse of customer activity. Now we are ready to begin our demo. We right-click our Augmented Data Warehouse folder and create a new SOAP data source within it. We name the data source Temperature Web Service and enter the URL for the web service we want to consume. This URL can be found on the SOAP tab of the Published Web Service resource we installed earlier. We also enter our user credentials for the web service. We introspect the data source and select both of the web services. We can now retrieve data in XML format from our two web service operations. However, what we really want to do is join this data with relational data from our corporate warehouse. Let's transform our XML data into flat cursor structures. We begin with our simple web service operation. We drag it into the transformation editor and transform it into a cursor. We can now execute the transformation and see our cursor data returned. Note that this web service has been defined with an input parameter. Even though no value is needed, we must supply the parameter. We do this by right-clicking the In block on the transformation and selecting Add Parameter. We select the Complex category and choose the parameter that matches the name requested by our input block, Temperatures by City All. Our transformation now returns a flat cursor that we can join with other relational data. We do the same with our second operation. The only difference here is that this operation does require a value for its input parameter, which is named Wrappered Temperatures by City Filtered. This parameter represents the minimum temperature for which we will return data. For our testing purposes, we insert a 0 when we execute the transformation. Again, our XML response is transformed into a flat relational cursor. We can make our transformed data even easier to work with by wrapping it as relational views. For the simple web service, we just drag the transformation into the view editor, define our columns on the grid panel, and execute the view to see our data. Wrapping our parameter-driven transformation as a view is a bit more complex. We can drag the transformation into the view, but we must also define the parameter as a TDV virtual column, as shown here. We set a default value of 60 for the parameter, so the view can run without requiring the user to set a specific value. However, we expect that most users will provide the filter parameter in a where clause, which we set up here. When we execute the view using the default value, we get these results. Here we use TDV's SQL Scratchpad to show how a typical user would access the view with filtering in a where clause. Note that an equal sign is required when specifying the parameter value in the where clause. You cannot use greater than or less than. Now we are ready to augment the customer activity data on the corporate warehouse with our temperature data from the external web services. We simply join our customers and orders views with the view of the simple web service, define our desired output on the grid panel, and execute the view. For each customer purchase, we now see the high temperature for the customer's city on the purchase date. We have augmented the physical data warehouse so that end users will now perceive it as being much bigger and more powerful. We follow the same process with our filtered view of temperatures, joining it with customers and orders views, defining our desired output on the grid panel, and executing the view. Here we use the default value for the virtual column, but end users could use any value they need. Our demo is complete. Let's summarize what we have seen in this presentation. TDV. This SOAP data source capability enables TDVs to introspect any SOAP-based web service. Data responses from these web services can then be used within TDV like any other data. For example, data may be transformed, federated with other data sources, and published for end-user consumption. SOAP data sources are important to our customers for two reasons. First, they provide a quick and easy way for TDVs to access data that is accessible via URL on the Internet or on corporate intranets. Second, SOAP-based access is a commonly used API for many third-party enterprise applications. In both of these cases, SOAP data sources enable TDV to access data that may not be available as relational table structures. TDV can then transform this data and join it with data from other sources. For example, SOAP-based data may be transformed into relational structures and then used to augment data in a corporate data warehouse. Thank you.